So, hello everyone and welcome to the final Metro Futures webinar for this public consultation on the design of the new metro trains. I'm Simon Bowen from Open Lab at Newcastle University, and I've got Huw Lewis with me here from Nexus, the Customer Services Director. Hi Huw.
Good morning.
So,
good afternoon.
Good afternoon, good morning, afternoon. We're on the cusp.
Mm-hmm.
So I checked the figures this morning, and we've had up to about now, we've had 20,000 responses through social media and the Metro Futures website on the consultation for the new trains. That's an amazing number.
That's easily the biggest consultation that Nexus has ever been involved in. So, I mean, thanks for all the hard work that Open Lab's done in publicising this and making sure people get involved and have loads of ways to get involved. We always said that this £362 million new fleet would be designed based on what passengers wanted. We can do that because it's a bespoke design specially for Metro, and I think we're really delivering that now, and those numbers are the proof.
Yeah, and I was speaking to somebody from Stadler, the train manufacturer, I think it was last week, and he was saying that this just doesn't really happen with public transport projects of this scale, to design it with the people across the region who are going to be the ones using it.
I think this is unique anywhere in the world. We've never seen anything like this, and we are really thrilled to do something like this, where we've not just said to the passengers, you know, you can choose the colour of the seat, or there's an ABC on the livery. This is about from the ground up. We started with you 4 years ago on a consultation that got some of the initial principles of the train off the ground. We had thousands of responses to that, but this is just off the scale. And it's really important because we're talking about the details of a train that's going to be with us for 30 years to come. And particularly if you've got mobility issues, if you've got visual impairments, we have to get that right. But we've also got one big box in which we've got to try and accommodate and balance the needs of so many different passengers and people that will use these trains for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely, and I think it's worth saying that we're, I think, almost 3 weeks into the consultation now, and we're coming towards the end. So thank you to everyone who has provided a response, either through social media or on the website. But this period of consultation is due to end a week on Friday, on the 16th, which is a month after we started. So there is still time for people to have a say, and there is an opportunity today actually to have a say during this session. So one of the items that we'll be doing in a few minutes' time is to step through the different options within the train and ask people to respond to what their preferences are for those. And you'll see in the description of this YouTube live stream, or on Facebook if you're watching on Facebook, hello to our Facebook viewers, there is a link to Slido. So Slido is where we are gathering the questions that I'll be putting to Huw later, but it's also where we will be giving you some poll questions about the design options within the train. So please visit there. The other way that you can get involved is on the Metro Futures website, metrofutures.org.uk. So if you haven't been there and looked at that yet, please do. There's 3 different ways that you can look at the trains, and you can provide feedback, and you can help decide on some of those finishing touches. So a little bit more about what we're going to do this morning. So I should say this is the third of these kind of events that we've had, and the previous events are available still on YouTube if you want to watch them there. We're going to show you the train in a minute. We've got a short video that shows you the new train. And I think I should say that design is the proposed design from Stadler, and there are still some options left to decide on it, and that's part of what this consultation is about. The other part of this consultation, I think, is just to check that those trains fit the needs of people across Tyne and Wear, the needs that people told us about in 2016. Check that it still is that train that will last the next 30 years. And there's an extra thing that we're going to do today, and that's to provide some insights, some initial insights that we've got from workshops that we've been running with people over the last 2 weeks. So we've had a series of 8 workshops with the people with a variety of needs, a variety of journey types, looking at the trains and really discussing them in a bit more depth. And we've got 3 particular insights that we want to share about that before we get into the looking at the design options. And then at the end of the session, that's when we're going to have this Q&A session. We're planning to finish at 1 o'clock. We'll see how many questions that we can get through during that time. I should say that what we've done in previous events is when we haven't had the opportunity to answer all the questions during the sessions, we've sent those questions with Huw back to Nexus, and we've got written responses to those questions. That list of written responses is a document which is now available on the Nexus website. I've asked one of the people here if they can put a link to that in the comments. Yes, I've been told it's there, so great. So you can go and have a look at that now if you want. And if there's any additional questions that come out of today that we haven't answered, we will put the responses there. Okay, so I think without further ado, it's probably time to have a look at the new train. Now, if you've watched this before, you will have seen the new train, but for those new people, we're going to move over to a video now, and this is the new train for Tyne and Wear Metro. So there we go, the new train. As I say, that's not got all the finishing touches in. That's what we're going to talk about in a little bit in this session. I should just remind people that we are using Slido as the way that we're asking people to answer questions and to put their questions to Huw. So if you haven't been onto Slido yet, there's a link in the description and in the comments, or you can visit slido.com and enter the code MF2020 webinar. If you're already there, we've already asked you where you live, and now we have a question which is how old are you? Some initial questions there. And I'm going to just activate the next question, which is quite simply, what do you think of the new Metro? How many stars out of 5 would you give it? And so that question's live now. So if you could respond to that, that'd be great, as that's our starter for 10. 4 or 5 stars, 3, 4, 5 stars, 2, 3, 4, 5, more 5 stars. We're kind of, 4 or 5 stars, so not bad. We've got, we're in the right territory, sounds like it. So the first thing I wanted to do was to give some design insights, some insights from workshops that we've had in the last 2 weeks. So I think, as I said at the beginning of this session, we've had 8 workshops, and we've had people with a variety of experiences and needs and journey types for Metro in there, including people with poor vision and visual impairments. So the first insight is about making the doors stand out. So if you go onto the Metro Futures website, and one of the things we're going to show you in a minute is that there are various options for the finishings on the inside of the train. And one of them is about the combination of floor marking, of door colour, and of the grab poles. So one of the options uses yellow doors, and our participants thought that was a good idea because they really stand out. And if you have a visual impairment or you have poor vision, that's a really important feature. Those doors need to stand out. But if you have, that then means that you have a silver or metal pole. And I should say this combination is there because Stadler advises, and it's an important consideration, that the pole needs to stand out when seen in front of the door. If you're getting onto the train, then you see one against the back of the other, as we can see here on this image. And so if they're the same colour, that's problematic. But with a metal pole, you might have difficulty seeing it, and you might have difficulty seeing that pole elsewhere in the train. And people were talking about this in workshops and preferred the yellow poles as standing out more. Unfortunately, there isn't a combination that we have at the moment on the website that allows that. But in discussing this in the workshops, one of our participants, or a couple of our participants, got to talk about this and suggested that with this version here, which is with the yellow poles that we can see, how about making the edges of the door stand out? Making the edges of the door stand out by with a yellow strip or some kind of contrasting area. And also the area around the button that we've got there as well, making that stand out. And then another participant echoed that. So that's the first instance of where we've got something that isn't in the initial options that we provided, but it's a really useful piece of feedback. And that shows the value of these kind of deeper discussions that we've been having.
It is excellent feedback. We want the doors and the poles to be different, and we need to think hard now about that so that our passengers don't have to think when they're using the train. It's just instinctive. The doors are going to have lighting around them, and that's a feature that comes in as the train arrives at the station, so the doors light up in different colours to say they're opening or closing. But I think that further reassurance, which is what's come through in the workshops, that's something we need to look at.
Yeah, indeed. I also remember in that workshop people were talking about, could we do something with the poles as well to make those, to put some patterning or marking on the poles so that they stood out as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next design insight, and this is about bike racks and glass partitions. So again, we were discussing the three options for securing bikes in the multi-purpose areas in trains. And there are three at the moment that have been put forward for consultation. There is a strap, which is like a seatbelt strap in the middle of the multi-purpose area to strap your bike in. And then additionally to that strap, there's either what gets called the clamp or the hook, which, as you can see in this picture here, involves this kind of build-out area, this bulkhead that you slot your front or rear wheel of the bicycle in. Now, somebody made the valid point about this, that if you do have this, you can see we have these perch seats behind, that if you did that with this bulkhead here, you wouldn't be able to sit down, you wouldn't be able to perch rather, so you would lose that perch seat. But we also noticed that on these build-out sections, you have a glass partition to stop people obviously walking into the build-out. But when you have the strap, as is shown on this next image, you don't have that glass partition. And we got to talking about that in workshops. And we were talking about, well, actually, if there is just the strap, which people preferred, because you wouldn't lose the perch seat, would you have a problem where you would actually you might fall over a bike or more than one bike which was left in the bike space? And somebody particularly was mentioning visually impaired users who might use a long cane, and the difficulties that if the cane gets stuck between the wheel and the wall and they go the other side, but also anyone really, irrespective of visual impairment, might have a problem. And another participant made the suggestion, how about having the glass partition but without the hook or the clamp? So glass partitions around the multi-use area.
There's so much to think about with this multi-use area because it's a brand new feature of the train. These multi-use areas are new and they're separate from the wheelchair spaces, yep, which are elsewhere on the train. I think two important things I want to say. Really interesting questions around this glass partition. We've got to think about those strong points that have been made about canes and about whether somebody might bang into them. We've also got to think, of course, that if a cyclist or somebody with a buggy gets on through that door on that side, they need to swerve round, if you like, yep, into the space, and we need to find a balance between the two. But it's a very, very interesting point about the partition and having that, if you like, as standard to the solution. The point about the perch seat also, this is fascinating because the design's live. Of course it's live because we're doing this consultation and learning as we go along. Some of the early feedback has been about how many actual seats there are on the train. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've produced with Stadler a design that instead of having perch seats, in the multi-use spaces, we would have tip seats. So something
these are the flip-up seats.
Yeah, flip-up seats, if you like. Something that's going to fold down that you can then, if there's nobody using a bike or a buggy or something in the space, then you can actually sit on them. Could be great during the peak period. That's because people said, can you put more seats into the design than you have now? Of course, that means there's no perch. We still got to work out how that tip seat would work against one of these cycle storage solutions, but potentially an extra 12 seats in the design when they're needed, but still having the multi-use space.
Yep. So I'm going to move on to the last of the insights that we're going to share this morning, and this is about the end wall. So this is the area behind the driver's cab at the front and the rear of the train. And we asked people on the website what they would like to have there, and we offered some suggestions with some potential visualizations. And if you go on the website, you can see those, you can vote on those. But we got to discussing this during a workshop, and one of the young participants in this workshop, a younger person, suggested, well, what if you have a barcode on that wall that you could scan? People can scan with their phones, that would take you to a website. So you would then go to that website, and that website might have, we were talking about material created by local schools, by local communities. So it'd be like an information resource as a value-added thing, as well as it just being a picture there on the end wall.
I think the idea that you could have digital information fed into the train, and so keep updating that is a really good one. It's something I think we should look at, not just for the end wall, but for the digital screens that go right through the train. We know they're going to have information about the next station, perhaps about connections at airport and central station. Could we actually use them to tell you about local visitor attractions, tell you where to go when you get off the train at somewhere like Tynemouth or Seaburn Station if you're heading for the coast? And that could be built into the end wall as well. I mean, the end wall's fascinating. That's our blank canvas. It really is something that we can do what we want with, and whether it's art or information, whether it stays the same or changes over the life of the fleet, which I think it should. These are all really fascinating, and I can't wait to see the feedback from the whole consultation. Yep.
Yeah, so we're going to ask you a question about that, those people watching today, but also you can go to the Metro Futures website. I should say, for all of the options that we offer you on the website, you can include text comments as well. So if you see an option and you don't think there's anything there which you particularly like, then please leave additional comments there. We are going to pass those all back to Nexus. So this is the point at which we're going to dive into a digital version of the train that we have, and we're going to start asking you some questions about the different options here. So here again, I would like to invite people, please do go on to the Slido event for this. You can do it on a separate device, you can do it on a separate window on your computer or on your phone or your tablet, whatever you happen to be using. But we're going to be asking you questions about the design options that we show you. So you can either go to the link which is in the description of the video here on YouTube or on Facebook, or you can go to slido.com and enter the event code MF2020 webinar. Okay, so I'm going to go through and we're going to look at the inside of the train. So before I put the question up, there's the train itself. We're going to move inside. I should also say with the Slido as well, that's where you can submit questions that I will put to Huw later. And you'll be able to see other questions that people have submitted and vote up and vote down particular questions. Well, certainly vote up questions that you would like to be asked.
It's a sunny day, I can see, so the sunshine's on the falling onto the floor of the train. I think that's worth pointing out. That's not a weird floor pattern. That is the sunshine falling across the train. Yeah.
Although we can make it early in the morning or later in the evening, but we'll shall leave that for now. So the first question is about. So there's various packages of options, and we've had to do them as packages of options because of complementing and those contrasting requirements that we talked about with the doors and the grab poles and so on. So the first question is about seating style and the glass partition and the floor colour that you prefer. And we've got three different options here. So this is the colour and the patterning on the seating, which is then echoed in the glass partitions and the colour on the floor. So the first version is what we've got here, which is light grey with dots, or as a dots patterning and dots patterning on the glass. The second option is green with no patterning and stripes on the glass. And the third option is a darker grey colour for the floor with a logo on the seats and a logo on the glass. And we can look at that in the evening as well, or at night time. So it's important to think about how these things work when it gets dark. So if people could vote on that now, that would be useful. I'm just going through the different options at night time there. So at the moment we've got a 50-50 split between light grey dots and dark grey logo. So the first option, I should say we've had lots of responses to this on Twitter as well. I think there was a slight preference for dark grey with the Metro logo on Twitter for that question. But we will be summarising all the responses both from today and from the website and also from social media in the report that we give back to Nexus. So it will combine all of those elements. So light grey dots and dots is just winning at the moment on Slido. Okay, I'm going to go through to the next option now. Can we do priority seats? So we've got an option here to have the priority seats identified with a different colour, or a slightly different colour, or with the same colour of the remainder of the seats.
And I suppose the question is it different enough? If we're going to make it a different colour, how much do we need it to stand out, or it's not doing its job? Makes it easier for people with visual impairments to find them. And actually, it's a reminder to other passengers that, you should give way if someone needs a seat more than you.
Yeah, indeed. And that was something that came up in the workshops as well. One of the things that we were discussing was, in this version for example here, we have two quite close shades of grey for the priority seats. And the people with visual impairments and others in these workshops were saying, well, that doesn't really stand out. If we're going to make them stand out, make them really stand out. So that was a useful discussion, useful bit of feedback that we had from those workshops. Unsurprisingly, I think what we had on social media and what we're seeing elsewhere is very much that they should be indicated with a different colour. But if you're on the website and you want to make comments about this, how much of a difference do we want there? Okay, the next option is, again, it refers to that design insights that we had earlier, which is about the metal pole, the yellow floor, and the floor markings and the door colours. And we'll show you those different combinations here. So it could be that we have the yellow door, metal pole, yellow floor marking. We could have the grey door, the yellow pole, and the white floor marking. Or there's also a yellow door, grey pole, yellow floor marking, grey door, metal pole, and white floor marking. Mm-hmm. I'm remembering discussions that have in workshops about this as well, because I think people were talking about the yellow pole being quite a familiar thing that you see on other services as well. But yellow, I think somebody was mentioning that yellow is quite a light colour, and the walls in the trains are quite a light colour. So even then, that might not be quite right. And somebody was talking about dark blue being used on other transport networks, other transport systems.
Yes, it's a good question, and of course the pole and the contrast with the door is important, but we have to think about the poles right through the train. There's lots of them, and we want them to be the same, consistent colour all the way through the train. So let's test how to get the balance right. Not just by votes, of course, but through the workshops. It's really important that these votes are useful. They give us a really good indication, but a lot of the detailed work with our passengers takes place in those workshops where these questions are challenged in more detail and taken a bit further.
Yeah. So with that one, we've got the grey door, yellow pole, white floor marking as the slight winner for that. But as I say, we've been talking about with workshop as well. What we had on social media for that, for instance, was, where am I? We had, yes, slight preference for grey, yellow and white, so almost the same that we've got there. But there might be a another option, as we've been talking about, which kind of combines the best of all those different options. And what we will do is pass that back to Nexus, and then this is the kind of the data that you then go forward and combine it with the deeper discussions from workshops and your own expertise to make the final decisions on the trains.
Yes, and that's what makes this process unique.
Okay. So the next question is about the central pole here, and Stadler have suggested that there's 3 different versions that we could have of this. The single pole, as we can see there, a double pole where the pole splits at the top and then rejoins at the bottom, and a ring version.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Who knew? I thought a pole was just a pole until I became involved in this process, but 2 brand new options for Metro, for a brand new fleet.
Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting to see what people there, a strong preference for double pole there. Not many people voting for the ring, and that seems to be the case that was on the Twitter results that we have as well. Obviously we have the results from the website to come. We had an interesting series of discussions about this in workshops, I should say. Thinking about the ring option, people who have guide dogs, for instance, guide dogs or assistance dogs are great, but obviously their field of vision is low. So a guide dog would not see the ring. And so a guide dog would be paying attention to the lower part of the pole, and somebody who is a guide dog user could potentially have a problem with the ring section there. So that was a really useful piece of feedback that came back.
We do extensive training with guide dogs on use of the trains. Their puppy trainers are often on the trains, and of course that's something we'll need to make sure happens as this train becomes a real thing. I think they'll probably be one of the first users, actually.
Yes, and there are some further consultations using a partial mock-up of a train that are coming ahead, aren't there?
Yes, that's right. I mean, some of these details, and I'm conscious that people are watching today are having to look at it all on the screen, and the screen tells you a lot but not everything. So the next stage, which will be next year, is a full-size cross-section of the train from door to door, basically, of one section, where we need to get it right in the design, but we can test some of these ideas to breaking point there and make sure that it's absolutely right for different kinds of users.
Yep. So the next option we've been asking people about is about bike stands. So these are in the multi-purpose areas of the train. I should clarify that these are different and distinct from wheelchair spaces on the train, which are protected spaces that we're not anticipating that people with bikes and pushchairs and luggage would use those spaces. So as I mentioned in the design insights earlier on, there are 3 options here. There's the strap, we can see here, this kind of seatbelt type strap. There's then a version with a hook, which is with the build out, and if we spin around, you might not be able to see that. You can see it on the other side. We've got like a protrusion there where the front wheel or the rear wheel of the bike would go round, and you can see the glass partition. And then the clamp, which is a simpler build out where you would again slot your front or rear wheel of the bike in it.
This is a whole new aspect of the train. We don't have bike spaces on the trains, although we do allow cycles on under at certain times of day. So if you're a cyclist, think about how you're going to make your journey. I guess for me, as a cyclist, I'm not sure about the strap personally, and that's because I imagine if I took my bike on Metro, I would stand with it all the way through the journey. I wouldn't kind of clip it in and leave and go and sit somewhere else. Is that true? Is that what most people think? So how will you use the space as a cyclist? If you're not a cyclist, as we've said, discussed in the workshops, what are your concerns about that space? Imagine it as well with the tip seats in there. I think I'm really excited about the fact that we can get 12 extra seats into the train through putting in tip seats, and that may have an influence on the design of the bike space.
12 or 16?
It's 12.
Okay.
It's 12. So it's if you see that.
See 8 seats.
Yes. So the multi-use area is full width.
Yep.
So by the time, and there's 2 on the train in addition to the 4 wheelchair spaces.
Yes.
So that You can put 3 seats in on either side, so there's 6
Okay.
here and 6 in the other space. It's 12 across the train.
So 3 tip seats as opposed to 4 perch seats?
Yes.
Okay. I'd say it was interesting, also again, discussing this in the workshop, and I should say, looking at the Slido results, we're actually, 50% of people prefer the clamp, 43% prefer the strap. That's interesting. So split between the clamp and the strap, whereas, about even now. Whereas on Twitter, I think there was a strong preference for the clamp. There was almost 60% of people preferred the clamp then. But then again, those people weren't part of the workshop that we had and the insights that I've shared earlier. Yeah. So it's interesting to see that more people are thinking about the strap. And I wondered if we have a 4th option now, which is the strap plus the glass partition, whether people would have voted for that. I think the other thing to say is in the workshops, people were talking about what happens if you've got families and there's more than one bike. And or you've got a family of 4 all with their bikes. Could they stack their bikes up either side? How's that going to work if you've only got this build out and you can only post 1 wheel in? So there's all kinds of permutations to consider there.
It's a good question. I mean, the use of bikes on Metro is new. We've squeezed them into the old trains. We're creating space in the new trains. And I think it's as the trains come into service that we're going to learn exactly how many we can get in and at different times of day when the service is busy or quiet and how it's going to work. What I would say is that with an open plan layout for the train, it's much more flexible. It's much easier for passengers to get about. So those conflicts that might arise, one extra bike or there's already a buggy in the space, it's easier for passengers to negotiate and sort that situation out.
That's great, thank you. So I'll move on to the next one, which is about this area you can see on the lower part of the walls, the sidewall panel colour. And Stadler proposed 3 options there. We could consider making them almost the same colour as the wall, white, or a light grey, or a darker grey.
And this is not just about aesthetics and what looks nice. This was a suggestion that actually came from our staff, our customer service advisors, who have themselves had input into the process. If the wall is the same colour or too close to the colour of the floor, does it make it easy for people to navigate around the train? Are we losing that instinctive ability to know where to go? Particularly, again, we've talked a lot about visual impairment. So do we need a contrast? Is that the right thing to do? And what kind of contrast works for passengers?
Indeed. So, marginal preference for grey there, and that tallies up with what we've had on social media, so that's interesting. And this next one is another interesting option, which is about the end wall design that we talked about in Design Insights earlier. This blank canvas that we have for the metro trains. What do we want to see there? And so the suggestions that we'd made, and you can see on the website, unfortunately we can't show them in the model, but you will find them on the Metro Futures website. So we suggested, do we just leave it plain? Do we put some commissioned artwork there? Do we have iconography in terms of Northeast landmarks or Northeast people or something else? How about that community-generated content from local schools, that kind of thing? What would people like to see there? I actually was looking at social media responses this morning, and quite a few people have been photoshopping the versions that we've put up there and inserting their own ideas, as you can imagine, with some quite creative results.
It's great, the creativity the new fleet is inspiring. And if you haven't seen the post that puts Girls Aloud soundtrack over the video, yes, then find it on social media, because it's quite a hoot. But creativity is a good point, because Nexus, we've got a long tradition of investing in public art. There's public art stations around the system, so there's an opportunity here to bring it onto the trains as well. But also, as we always say, Metro is part of everyday life, so those suggestions about QR codes, about references to the local community, about the community being involved, you know, there's something to look at there, definitely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Huw. So it looks like Northeast Landmarks is the one that's won there. So thank you very much for everyone who's responded through Slido. Looking what came up on Twitter, it was about evenly split between North East people and North East landmarks. So that's interesting to know as well. I think we were talking about it in workshops, and we were talking about it almost like the snow dogs that were here a few years back, and people going on the metro trying to spot different end wall designs, and that becoming a thing that you could do.
And that's a good point. There's 42 trains. That's 84 end walls. They don't have to all be the same.
That's good to know, because people were asking that actually in the workshop, so that's good to know. Okay, so thank you everyone who submitted answers to the Slido polls. We're going to move on to some questions now that I know people have been submitting. But prior to this session, I'm going to go through and start asking the questions that people have been submitting. If you haven't submitted a question, please go on to Slido, slido.com, use the event code MF2020 webinar, and we will pick up questions from there. But before this session, I went on to and looked at some of the comments on Facebook and social media. And there's something I wanted to really put you on the spot about here. And I've got some quotes from people, because there has been quite a strong reaction from some people. And people were saying, basically, I'll read some quotes out now, just to give the flavour of it. This does not look like enough seats. Are you planning on making sardines of us even more than we are now? Why don't you have the seats facing forward? Not only will it give you more seats, it will help with social distancing if COVID is still around by 2022. Ageing worker population, we need more seats on these new metros. I even saw comments from people saying, don't ask us about the colour of the trains, put more seats in it. I think lots of people have expressed concern about the longitudinal seating and about the lack of seats on the trains. So where are we with that? Are we set with the longitudinal seating? Is there the option to change that? What's your response to those people?
We probably are set with it. That was something that was tested back in the first consultation in 2016-17, and we had to make a decision then, because when you go away and ask companies to build a train, they have to look at all sorts of issues, not just about the inside, but about things like how heavy the train's going to be, the weight on each of the axles on the trains. So we needed to set that very early, and there was a lot of consultation about it and a lot of debate, actually. I mean, Nexus is a public body, so we're accountable to the local politicians, actually, in Tyne and Wear. And the one aspect of the train design which local politicians voted on and canvassed their constituencies about was the seat design. And that was something that was voted on and agreed. I think it is the right design, but I can understand why people are concerned about this. There is a loss of seats, and I think I've already heard from this consultation of people say, can you get more seats in? And as I've said today, yes, we can put 12 more seats into the train. So there will be, compared to 128 now, we can get up to 116 seats. Plus the wheelchair spaces, so there's 4 spaces for wheelchairs. That's a slight loss, but the trade-off for that is very significant. The trade-off for that is that the train is much more open plan and easy to get around. The reason, I think, in that first consultation that a slight majority of people wanted these linear seating was most people use the system, most people use Metro around peak times. And even though the peak's changing because of COVID, we're thinking about a train that's going to be around not for 3 years, but 30 years. So those peaks could come back. And even today, with half the number of passengers, it gets pretty busy around kind of 8 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock at night. And we need to take account of that. Someone said there about sardines. I think far from squeezing people in like sardines, we're creating more space in 2 ways. 1, because there's more standing room. And 2, because it's easy to move around. So if I get on a train at, say, Central Station, I'm heading towards Sunderland, there's probably nowhere to sit if I get on just after 5 o'clock. As the train passes Peelaw towards Felgate, people start to get off. Seats become available. I want to get to that seat easily. And it's much easier with this linear arrangement as seats become available to kind of swap over and take space. We often find that seats on the current train are not actually used completely because nobody likes to step over or squeeze round somebody to get to that window seat that's been left vacant. Maybe someone's just dumped a bag on it or something like that. So linear seating gets rid of that problem. I do understand people are nervous about the change. We do want to push more seats into the design, and that's what we're trying to do with these tip seats.
Well, thank you for responding to that, Huw. I think it's been something of an elephant in the room in this consultation. I think lots of people in their response in the social media have said that. So I think
and I think it's important that we address this point. If you looked at the raw numbers that voted in the first consultation, it wasn't clear-cut, but of 3 designs we showed people, more than half, just over more than half, went for one, and that was the one we've chosen, which is linear seating. Now, a consultation process is not just about votes. It's about that in-depth research. It's about those workshops, because at the end of the day, we're trying to balance everybody's views and accommodate everyone as much as we can in one box. Now, the thing that persuaded me was not just the kind of raw numbers, but actually the in-depth comments. So you had some women saying that they would feel much more safe and secure with linear seating because they could move around and away more easily. People wouldn't be trapped on the inside of someone who just came and sat down next to them. People talked about antisocial behaviour. They talked about there'd be less litter because you couldn't, drop that Coke can where no one can see it. They talked about feet on seats. That becomes a thing of the past unless you're about 6'12" in my experience. So all of those things combined made a very strong case. It wasn't just about the numbers that chose each option. It was about that in-depth research that was done by Open Lab and Transport Focus that really said, well, why do you like it like this? And I think this is a strong design. It's one people will get used to very quickly, and it allows us to do things like create cycle space for buggies, maintain the wheelchair space, and make it easier for people to move around the train when it's busy.
So you mentioned antisocial behaviour there, which is a nice segue to the first question. So somebody asks, do drivers have access to onboard CCTV system to view in real time?
Yes, and we hope it won't just be the drivers, we hope it will be the control centre as well, so that if you pressed an alert button, the driver could see that, but potentially they could flip it straight on to security people in the control centre, and we could assist a passenger quicker in those circumstances.
And there are many more CCTV cameras on the new trains, aren't there?
Yes, I mean the old trains were designed in the 1970s, long before the idea of CCTV took hold. That meant we had to retrofit CCTV in. We did well, but it's not perfect. This is an opportunity to get it perfect. And as part of their design process, all of the bidders, and Stadler among them, had to show us a map that demonstrated that every corner of this train is on CCTV. And as you say, that CCTV can be seen in real time.
Yes, so much faster response times if there are issues on CCTV. I think we've been talking about this again in workshops, about what happens if and when, like you see on many buses now actually, that CCTV video is replayed on the information screens in the train as potentially another deterrent. Also, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Some people might show off for the cameras. It can be,
but again, passengers, we're led by passengers on this. Is that a good idea? Do they think that helps deter people, or does it cause certain elements to act up?
Yep. Please tell us your view on the Metro Futures website. There's an option particularly about CCTV on the Explore section there. So next question. Are there any features for deaf people? Could there be a facility so the driver can type a message? I often can't hear if a train is broken what I need to do. That's from Caitlin.
Really interesting question, Caitlin. You'll see actually in the picture there of the end wall that throughout the train, just below the ceiling is the next station information, but that's just the basic level of digital information, because there are screens at different locations, and those screens tend to be above priority seats, not just, but above priority seats, and you can put a richer level of information into those screens. It's not just actually about the trains, though, that kind of messaging that Caitlin's asking about, because we need to develop our apps, our digital offer, so that we're providing real-time information to customers, perhaps through their smartphones as well. And one of the things that we're looking at that's really important is that the connectivity right through the metro system is as good as it can be, is 4G, 5G going forward, so you don't lose a signal because you go into the cutting at Jesmond or into the tunnels, but you've got that all the way through, and that's another way to communicate with passengers. Drivers could potentially be typing into a screen. I'm not sure that's something we want the driver to do, because it takes longer to type and they'd need a keyboard in the cab. Perhaps if it was voice activated, and you know, they could speak in and have it turned into text, that's a solution. And it'd be interesting to really put Stadler to the test and see if they can work with electronics partners to make something like that happen. But the point that Caitlin makes is a really fundamental one. How do I get a live feed information update if something goes wrong that I can read? And one way or another, we want to provide that.
Yep. I'd also like to mention that actually this afternoon we're running a session with Deaf Awareness, which is going to be subtitled, a workshop session there, and we're hopefully going to be running a session in British Sign Language next week, a workshop for both those people. We'll put the links for that in the video description and also out via social media, so if you want to join either of those sessions, please do. We're making sure that we try and get as many people with the different perspectives as possible involved. Hopefully we'll be running another session specifically aimed at wheelchair users as well next week. So watch out for those links. So I'm going to go on to the next question. Is there the option for more ceiling grab rails? Some areas of trains between vestibules seem to have nowhere to grab onto. This came up in workshops as well, actually.
We've worked...
So we can see that there are some already in above the multi-use areas.
Yes. The plan we worked on with Stadler, the plan we worked with all the bidders, was for there to be poles throughout the train that a average size female can reach can move from one pole to the other without ever losing contact from them. And in the full design book, which you can find on the Nexus website, there is something called a pole map, which I'm quite proud of, because I insisted that all of the bidders to build these trains submitted this pole map, which demonstrates that point. And it's something we will test further when we have that full-size mock-up next year. I say all this because vertical poles, we think, offer a better solution than handrails that are up here that particularly shorter people may struggle to reach for. Straps which are loose, so if a train goes round a bend or breaks suddenly, you are moved backwards and forwards, you can be kind of jerked around on a strap. I don't think those are good solutions, and I think we want something better, which is why we concentrated on the poles being as frequent and well spaced through the train as possible. There are horizontal poles in some places. Those are above the multi-use areas. There's a logic to that, which is, for example, in the peak, we don't think at this stage that we'll be able to allow cycles on during the peak, but we'll have to see what passenger numbers look like in the years ahead. So you'd think there'll be more people standing in this area. There is that extra thing to hold on to. But in terms of moving around the train, we wanted a pole that was from ceiling to floor so that people of all heights could use them, and we wanted lots of them.
So next question here, are there any calculations to work out how many people can get on and off the new trains at the same time compared to the old trains?
Well, if you have a look at the door areas, the whole design has been about speeding up boarding. That's a really important part of the design. So I talked about an open, flexible layout. What you'll see at the door area is that either side of the doors, we've created what are called standbacks. So there's more room either side so that people move away from the doors. That makes boarding and alighting much, much quicker. But the open plan layout does as well. Nobody are one of the big frustrations is that when you're asked to move down the carriage and when you're trying to get onto a train and you can see space further along the carriage but everyone's huddled in the door area. So that open plan layout is about people spreading out along the carriage. That will speed up boarding, that will speed up alighting, and that's good for punctuality as well as people's comfort.
And I'm very familiar with looking at the inside of the trains now from the model, but it feels like there's more space between the doors because you've got that wider aisle along the length of the train, as well as this kind of stand-back area.
Yeah, it's probably a little difficult to tell from video, though I mean, these realisations are amazing in terms of the information they're giving us now. But certainly when you look at the plan, yes. The real key thing, and as I was saying, is this stand-back area. So people won't stand right in front of the doors anymore, and they will be encouraged to move away from the doors. The pole layout is all about that as well. It's spacing people through the train when it's busy, so that everybody's that much more comfortable, and boarding and alighting is faster.
Okay, thank you. I can see a couple of related questions here, which are about the extension of the network. Will the Metro run to the Metro Centre? If North West Durham were included in Nexus Fare Zone, the ridership would increase. So what about network extensions? How will the new trains help that?
Well, in two ways. One of which is Nexus always wants to expand Metro. We're incredibly proud of it, just as the whole region is. And so where do we go next? We got up to Airport in 1991, into and through Sunderland to South Hilton in 2002, and we've added stations since. We don't want to stop there. The investment we've made in the last 10 years in our track and our overhead line, £350 million, means that's in good shape. Getting the new trains means that, well, we've got new trains and they'll be around for 30 years. So we can really start to turn our attention to where we can expand. Of course, expansion is expensive. It needs government funding. It's hundreds of millions of pounds even for quite short lines, and you need a really good business case saying that for all that government investment, the payback in economic terms, in social terms for the region is worth it. So we have to work hard to make those cases. One thing about the new trains that makes it a bit easier and a bit cheaper is that these trains will have batteries. So although they will mainly run on our overhead line, and they'll be loads more efficient, use 30% less energy compared to the current fleet. They will also have the batteries, and that means that shorter extensions, at least, we can do them without overhead line. So that makes it a lot cheaper and simpler. It makes it easier to share lines with other train operators, and that really does increase the potential for expansion if we can find those business cases where it's really justified.
I suppose those batteries could get people out of trouble in a way if there's a
Absolutely.
malfunction with
Yes,
the overhead
completely.
lines.
So if you do have a problem with the overhead line, at the moment, you know, a train can't move if a substation has a fault. We've got a substation at Gateshead Stadium. If there's a problem with that, then nothing moves south of the river, basically. But in future, they would have enough battery life to coast through, and the battery would start charging again the moment they got under a powered section of line. So hugely important for reliability.
Mm-hmm. I've got another question I want to ask here, and it relates to some things that we've been discussing in the workshops. And so somebody asks, who will police the number of bikes being taken onto trains? How will buggies and wheelchairs get priority? So this is something that came up actually quite a lot in workshops. You know, we have these multi-purpose spaces on the new trains, and these wheelchair spaces that are ostensibly just for wheelchair users. But who's going to look after that? Who's going to make sure that's the case?
I think that's a really good question, and particularly the journey we're on about allowing bikes onto Metro and trying to enable that is tough because of the human element to it, and thinking about all the things that could happen and could go wrong. So just to start with the wheelchair space, let's be clear about this. We have 4 wheelchair spaces on the new trains. That's the same as on the old ones. And those are 4 wheelchairs. They are set aside. They're different to what you see here. And that is about making sure that the 50,000 wheelchair passengers that we have, most of whom, the vast majority, make their journeys without needing staff to help them, will have an easier experience. And hopefully that number will grow, and that number will grow because these trains will be easier to get on and off. They will have a sliding step at every single door, and that will make it even easier for wheelchair users to use our system. Immensely proud about that. The bike spaces are different. They're in a different area, and they're not just spaces for bikes, they're spaces for buggies, for luggage if you're going to the airport or something as well. Now, we don't have staff on trains apart from the driver. That's not going to change. So there will always be a negotiation about space. The open plan layout makes that negotiation a bit easier. There's a bit more room for people to move around. But I think we will have to tread carefully and move in stages to see what's possible in terms of how many bikes, when they can travel on trains, off-peak versus peak, and just see how we go about that. So I wouldn't want to be drawn on that number yet, other than to say, for the first time, we've created a space that really has the cyclist in mind. We're going to have a full-scale mock-up. One of the benefits of that big cross-section I talked about is you can actually bring together lots of people and create these situations, not on a computer, but in real life. Can we have 50 volunteers, 2 of whom have got bikes and 3 of whom have got pushchairs, and work out how that interaction works? And then we can make final decisions based on that.
Yeah. I've just seen another question, actually. I've seen it elsewhere as well, about flip-up seats in the wheelchair spaces. We can confirm there will be no flip-up seats. It's not.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The wheelchair space should just be there for wheelchair users when they need it. Doesn't stop somebody standing in the seat, in the space, so you can see the perch. But what we don't want is a tip seat there so that somebody has to ask for a passenger to move so they can occupy that space, and that's a very important principle. We did look to see if we could fit one tip seat in so that the wheelchair user and a companion could sit close together. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work, and we felt it was too much of a compromise. So it will be like that, and there won't be tip seats in that area.
Okay. So a question on information provision. On the onboard passenger information screens, can key information which is currently shown on the Metro app, such as bus and ferry interchanges, be also shown?
On the screens?
On the screens, yeah.
Yes. And we need to work with Stadler and their technology suppliers on just how much we can put on these screens. I mean, to explain, the screens are for information. Advertising is separate. That's off to the side, cards a bit like now, but the screens are just for information. So really, it's the art of the possible. I'd like to think that the example that you see in this image, which I guess is the numbers of local buses as you approach Gateshead Interchange, is possible. Mm-hmm. At Central Station, can we tie into the National Rail computer to tell people what platform upstairs their train is leaving from before they've even arrived? And I think at a previous webinar, people were talking about flight information at Newcastle Airport. I hope all of those things will be possible, as well as the ability, for example, as Caitlin was saying earlier, that we could use the screen to put up real-time information if something goes wrong. Although lots less will go wrong because these trains will be 15 times more reliable than the current ageing fleet.
And that takes us into kind of announcements, audio announcements. Somebody's asked, will we have the same station announcements on the new fleet as the old fleet with the original voices? And I guess also I'd add to that, how much of what we see on the passenger information screens will translate to an audio announcement?
You need to be careful about audio. You need audio announcements to be short and to the point, so that they are clear for everybody on the train. You don't want to put too much into an audio announcement, or bits get lost. It's the funny thing about being able to design a train, especially a bespoke train for Metro, is that we could go into detail like, we want a regional voice on our trains. That's what passengers have got used to with the current announcer, the male voice, and that's what we want, and that's what we're going to get. Mm-hmm. We'll probably have a bit of a search for somebody. It may be the same announcement, it may be different, but certainly it will have the local character that Metro embodies, from the logo and the colour scheme to the look and feel of the trains and stations, and that voice is part of the experience. But the announcements will be short and to the point, because that's what's most clear when passengers need it.
Okay, thanks very much, Huw. So we've only got a minute or two left now, so I'm just looking through for some key ones. I should say, if you've got questions here, we don't get to them, we'll pass them back to Huw, and Nexus will provide a written response that we'll publish on the website, and we'll share it again through the links that we have in YouTube and elsewhere. So a couple of people are asking about, will the trains be dual voltage?
No, they will. What dual voltage means is that the pantograph, as it's called, the thing that sticks up on the roof of the train, can draw power either from our own system, which is 1500 volt direct current, or it could switch to the national system on the East Coast Main Line, which is 25,000 volt alternate current, AC. We looked at that, we spoke to manufacturers from around the world, and we decided not to do it. The reason we decided not to do it is because you need a great big transformer, and it would eat into the ceiling height. You would basically have a very low ceiling section of the train to accommodate that. So not a good solution for the passenger. Instead of dual voltage, we went with battery, and battery's getting better all the time, so the number of kilometres you can go, battery will increase and increase as time goes on, and that's where we're going to get the flexibility to operate on lines other than our own system in the future.
So there's some more comments here. I just wanted to raise one because it relates to the Metro Flow project. Will that be implemented alongside the new fleet? Because otherwise the number of seats per hour will massively reduce compared to now. The
Metro Flow project is a £104 million project, which is funded, which is part of our £500 million investment in Metro before 2025. And what it does is, by taking out some pinch points in the track around Peelaw and Jarrow, it means we can increase the frequency from a train every 12 minutes down those lines to a train every 10 minutes, not just to South Shields, all over the system, up to Airport, down to Sunderland. That creates the capacity for 24,000 more passengers to travel every day in the kind of same level of comfort and space that we have now. So it's a good question, because it's really important that we deliver them, yes, alongside each other. So by the time the whole fleet is in service, and we'll actually have to order 4 extra trains in order to do this, and we've got the funding to do that, there will actually be more seats. Not more seats on each train, but more seats in total every hour, if you like, passing through Hebburn or passing through Felgate. And that is a substantial and significant difference.
That's great. Thank you very much, Huw. So we haven't got through all the questions. I can see some of the ones there. They're related to questions that you've answered before. We will pass those back to Huw. And I know that Nexus have been collated almost like a frequently asked questions document, which is available on the Nexus website. These will go into that, and you will add more responses there. We'll also share that through the social media associated with this project as well. So that's the end of this webinar session. Have you got,
I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Open Lab for hosting these sessions, because we've reached, I think, more than 1,000 people through the webinars alone as part of the 20,000 who have engaged in the consultation. And I've never done this before, and it's been an amazing experience. And I'd like to thank also the people who have taken part. We're listening, but actually, logging on, looking at the design, answering the questions, it helps us make a better train. So thanks to everyone who's taken part, and I hope they've enjoyed the experience and found it useful. We certainly have.
Yes, well, thank you for letting us be part of this as well. It has been very much a team effort. We've worked very much and very closely with Nexus's social media team and communications teams. You know who you are. Thank you very much. And it's been a team effort here at Open Lab. And we are still listening. That's one thing I want to say. We've reached 4,500 people this session, apparently. That's great. Thank you very much. It's good to know that. We are still listening. The Metro Futures website will allow you to look at all these features and comment all these features One of the things that we've been doing, we've shown you one version of the train. We've configured one, but if you go on the Metro Futures website, you can try out all the different options. You can also explore the train in 360 degrees and see each of those options in place. And lastly, you can try out the Metro from different people's perspectives. We've got 6 imaginary people, personas, who actually have real life experience that other people have told us about. And we're inviting you to look at the Metro trains from somebody else's perspectives and respond to it. Please do that. You've got until Friday the 16th of October to do that. Please do go and do that and make sure that you've had your say on the new Metro trains. So that's it from us for today, and we hope to see you soon with some exciting results from the consultation. Thank you very much.